Welcome to the Runners World podcast with me, Rick Pearson.
Me, Ben Hobson.
And me, Jane Maguire.
This week we're speaking with James Poole about the world's 5 hardest races. We've gone gnarly.
That was
terrifying.
A terrifying episode.
James, hello.
Hello.
He's here already.
I'm here. As always, honoured to be on the on my favourite running podcast. So thank you very much. Great to see you all, and obviously to speak to you as even better.
Straight in.
Compliments get you everywhere.
Jane, you did the marathon this weekend.
I did.
Was it your hardest race?
Yeah, probably was.
Oh, there we go.
Probably
Good.
was.
Done.
Any tips on how to fix my lower back would be fantastic.
Oh, no.
That's next week. That's next week's episode.
That's next week. Yeah, tune in next week for that.
How did you get on?
But you know what? I had a call with my brother the night before, and he said quite harshly, "You never really. I'm afraid of pain. I hate being in pain." And he was like, "If you run, whatever you do in a marathon, it's going to hurt. Like if you walk a marathon, it hurts. So you need to accept you're going to be in pain and just go for it." That was his advice, which is against any advice I've ever been given. So I just did it. I just went out there and tried to be in pain for as long as possible.
There we go.
And that worked.
Paid off.
You nailed that.
I feel like the idea is to be in pain for as short a time as possible.
Yes.
That's what I thought. So I was like, I'm going to go out and take it really easy for 20 miles, and then I'm going to try and go harder for 6 miles. He was like, nope, you need to just push yourself. Push yourself harder.
Well,
is he a coach? Is his coaching available online? No.
Yeah. No. I think he's right. I think my problem is if you said to me, go and run 7 out of 10 difficulty, I'd go, okay, and then I'd probably go actually do 4 out of 10. I'm a lazy runner because I like to take it easy, and actually I feel fine today. So maybe, I wasn't like collapsing over the finish line. Isn't
there some sort of great a moment of pain for a lifetime of greatness or something? Isn't that like the sort of that's
sort of like a poster?
Yeah, exactly.
Something like
that. Great.
I saw lots of people with T-shirts being like, "Pain is temporary, Strava is forever." I was like, okay.
Oh no.
I'm not going that far because it makes me feel sick, but I see the message. Sorry if that was you.
James, were you watching it, James? Did you go down there to watch it, or watching it on the telly?
No, I was down on the course and down at Westminster for a good while.
Oh wow!
Seeing the runners come through, and I guess for me, looking the best performance I saw was Sam Harrison.
Yeah. Yes.
With an absolutely incredible run on a tough day, and we stood there and Sam Harrison came past, and then obviously a little bit after the main elite field, and then we were like, where are the rest of them? But it was a crazy race, but brilliant performance from her. So congratulations to Sam.
The women's race was very exciting. That's for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And Hassan, it was great. I mean, I started watching her at home, and to see her then being discounted at like 5 miles, and then to come win it was like, what great TV and what great running.
Is she the athlete with the greatest range ever? I'm struggling to think of someone who's as good over a variety of distances as her. Just amazing. Like Mo's got a great range as well, but he ultimately hasn't won the London Marathon, for instance, whereas she's gone and done that. So I kind of think it's
probably like
pretty exceptional.
You're talking like your Bekele's and your Haile Gebrselassie and that kind of like that's yeah.
And your Kipchoge's, even. He's 10,000 meters was still his very strong performances. I think
true.
Perhaps that's the hallmark of the real all marathon greats is that they have this range, ability to win the Olympics at 5,000 meters and then level up and run a marathon. I think when I was watching, once they went around the corner, I was watching it on my phone the last few hundred meters, and you're like, just to be able to put that speed in at the end of, like you said, everyone thinks they're going to do the marathon and do 20 miles and then like unleash the nitro with 6 miles to go. And all that really happens, as we all know, is you go, I can't go any faster. And if you definitely can't go any faster. If you're lucky, you can maintain the same speed, apart from that last 100 meters where you can manage to find a little bit of extra. But it's to be able to put that level of speed on at the end is just insane.
I also am obsessed that she was like, why do I sign up for a marathon? This is rubbish before.
Yeah.
And then won. Like, That was just the best. Yeah, I'm obsessed.
Press conference was the most like least media trained press conference ever. Like everyone else like, I'm gonna try really hard. My training's gonna pay off. And she's like, God, I don't know why I've done
Why
this.
did I do it? This is rubbish.
That's the most relatable thing an elite athlete's ever said, though. I think
Yeah, 100%.
39,000 people who are sitting at home, or, if they were watching it, every runner would be like, yeah,
100%.
Yeah, you're my hero.
What was I thinking?
Yeah.
Well, look, should we get on? Should we get on to the?
Because I think that like we talk about the marathon because that's probably the most relatable benchmark of hardness when it comes to this sort of average runner's approach to running, and taking on a marathon is incredibly hard. I think it kind of gets a little bit diluted in sort of around this time of year and the rhetoric around how many people do it and all this sort of. But a marathon is really, really hard. Like it's a long way to go. But what we're going to talk about is sort of above and beyond that, which is these sort of like, I don't know, we're going to break it down into why we consider them so hard, but these are the sort of 5 hard races. James, you've probably done them all.
I've done one of my little list here.
All right,
this is good.
Yeah.
But I would qualify, and I think it's a really good point to qualify. I actually think the marathon, to run a good marathon, and that's obviously relative to your experience and your fitness, to do it right and finish that marathon having met your potential on that day is actually one of the hardest things to do. Because and I love that because, I love the marathon just for that reason, because it's the perfect blend between speed and endurance. You have to run quite a long way. 26 miles is quite a long way at quite a fast pace. And if it goes wrong, and it does go wrong, but I have personal experience, gone wrong many, many times. It's that it feels like if you go wrong at 20 miles, it feels like the next 6 miles takes about the same time as the previous 20. And it's just so hard. And I think it's such a knife edge between going too hard early in the first half and then blowing up in the second half, or not going hard enough in the first half and leaving some time on the road. And that delicate balance, which is why before we go into the crazy hard races, I think it is still one of the hardest things to get right as an amateur runner.
For sure.
And I think you get it wrong more often than you get it right.
I was thinking about like what is it that makes a race hard, and I think distance is one thing, isn't it? But it's probably not the only thing at all. Cut-offs feels like another thing that makes something difficult. Maybe terrain, and finally weather conditions. I think maybe those are the sort of 4 that you kind of factor in.
100%. That would be the sort of yeah. I mean those. I was thinking the same thing. What makes something more hard than the other? And without wishing to leap into it, I'm just going to. The elephant in the room, which I'm going to cover right now, is I'm not going to talk about marathon dressage other than right now to say it's 100% not the hardest race in the world.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry if you're listening, you've done it, and you love the hyperbole because that's how they sell it. The hardest foot race in the world, not even close.
Okay. Well, hit us with the first one then. Yeah.
So let's go with my first. These are in no particular order, but I think we should start with the last annual Vol State, which again, these are all quite a little bit off the, as you might expect from me, a little bit off the beaten track, pun intended. But the last annual Vol State.
What is it for people like me who have no idea what you're going on about?
I'm glad you asked because I really want to tell you. It's basically this insane road race from Dorena Landing in Missouri, Castle Rock in Georgia. So it's a US race. It's organised by Lazarus Lake, Gary Cantrell, famously of the Barkley Marathon. And it's another one of those sort of crazy races that just is there and exists. But it's 500 kilometres and it's held in July.
So it's hot.
And they have 2 categories for entry. One is crude, fairly obvious, you have a crew. The other is screwed, which I love. Yeah. Basically, unsurprisingly, it doesn't have a crew. And this race goes through some of the hottest parts of the deep south in the US. It's largely on the road. If you're self-supported, you're sleeping like a hobo, rough. It doesn't really, I don't think it has anything of any note. I mean, it's like uncharacteristically hot and pointless.
Right.
I think even the start, you go to this Dorena Landing is in Missouri, and the only reason you get a ferry over the river to this point, at which point the race starts, and then you get the ferry back over to where you came from. And I think it's just so they can add an extra state to the race. It's that sort of stupidity that I kind of love, but super hot. I mean, like in the 100 100 plus degrees, no shade. If you're self-supported, apparently the thing to watch out for is dead armadillos. I know from someone who's done it. They crunch apparently when cars run over them.
Oh wow, that sounds horrible.
That is bleak.
It's a bleak race. It sounds like a bleak race.
So this
That's like stepping on a water bottle, but times a million.
and it once was live, and I think they're everywhere, and they get run over by the cars. In a typical sort of Barclay Marathons, Gary Cantrell race, when you get there, you just get like a warm handshake or something, and that's it, and you're done.
This is quite a good one to start with because it's a sense of attrition that you're getting from these sorts of things. So the hardness comes from the combination of distance and conditions. All right. I mean, so even if you're crude, right? So let's say take it that you're going to go crude, so you don't have to sort of the self-sufficient bit. You can kind of slightly less arduous because you're going to have a crew and all that. But this is just like you versus time and the environment.
It's not particularly. Hasn't got lots of climbing. Hasn't got lots. The terrain is on the road, so it's not like the terrain isn't difficult. I guess of all those criteria, it's got a lot of distance and a lot of heat. And that's what makes it super hard.
How about boredom, James? Do you think boredom comes into this? Because I often think like something like a canal race, and this is like that times 10, is more difficult than a kind of changing landscape. Whereas this sounds like you're just going on a kind of hot road in the deep south of the US. I think that would mentally be very difficult to sort of carry on.
Someone said to me that when we spoke last week, and then I spoke to people about some of these races, they said it was like breathing through a straw on this race.
Oh, right, because
that is how thick the air is. It's
humidity
like
and like
really thick. But yeah, I mean, all of these long distance things, you have to be comfortable with your own company, and maybe have a screw loose, and probably be able to cope with the boredom. I mean, I think I was there was some big records that went on Saturday at the Centurion 100-mile track. But if there's something for boredom, running around a 400-meter rubber ring on the 24 hours and the 48-hour track. I mean, that would just be what do you do? You come round, you say thanks to everybody every 2 minutes. I mean, or do you just ignore people? I mean, I haven't done one, and it's kind of it's not. I'm not sure it's an itch I really want to scratch, but there is a sense of monotony of all of the ones coming up. I think just because of the distance.
Yeah. Well, what's next? What's next on the list then?
All right, I'm going to pick another one. I think this one's probably the hardest race you're ever going to do. The Iditarod Trail Invitational.
I've heard about
this race?
It's like you've got a sled, haven't you? You're going across like the Arctic and on
1,000 miles. 1,000 miles. I mean, that's not.
This sounds like an expedition. This doesn't sound like.
Well,
yeah.
I mean, it's the invitational for a good reason, right? And do you know what? But a bit like having the half marathon. If you're not up for the half marathon, the good news is they've got a shorter one, and it's only 350 miles.
Oh, that's fine then.
So.
Oh yeah, do that. The sprint. Yeah.
But I mean, but this going back to our kind of criteria. So this one is like really long. It's in Alaska, so it's like completely off the grid. It goes down to like minus 40 degrees or something at night, and there's wind. I mean, just to give you an example, it took the last time it was on 2022, 22 days, 22 hours to finish the thing.
How do you get that much time off work? What do these people do?
That's it.
I think people just do this, and then make a career out of speaking at dinners or something. I think that's probably what you do. Yeah.
How much running does that have in it? Like theoretically, like that would be my one sort of. Just because of like snow.
Well, those they pull a sled because they literally you have to be self-supported. And in fact, when I looked at the qualifying rate, the races you need to do to be the 9 or 10 races that they suggested, you need to have done, are all harder than anything else I've got on this list. So we could do a whole episode on the 9 hard races you need to do to get into this very hard race. So that's how ridiculous it is.
I think it's an interesting point though, Ben, about because I think something like say like the spine might make it onto most people's list, and I think there's a case
on my
for the
list,
spine. But I also know that someone did the spine once and they just walked it the whole thing, and obviously probably didn't sleep very much. I'm not saying it makes it not hard, but I think there's something about if you can complete this thing without having to run at all, does that in any way make it a little bit easier or like less gnarly? What do you think?
Well, I can speak having now done the speed project solo twice, which is 500 kilometers. In 2022, I did it with a film crew, so some support, but the intention wasn't for them to be my crew; they were just there. And then this year, I did it self-supported, so everything I needed for 300 miles was on in a backpack. But I could use the rules allow you to use things that are available to everybody. So you can use gas stations and convenience stores and motels and hotels if they're available to everybody, they're available to you. And the honest answer is that all of these long distance things, probably over 100 miles, that they're more and more about fast walking. Because personally, when I think about these things, it's like if I run fast, I need to put more energy back in because I use more energy. It will take more toll on and I say fast, let's just say, casual, easy running for as long as you can. You still have to put in the calories that you expend. It still makes you more tired physically, and it causes damage to your muscles. So you have to weigh up this idea of like, if I go really fast, then I need more calories and I need more sleep and I need more, and I'm going to cause more damage. So maybe I should go slower. It's a very sort of classic hare and tortoise thing. And people do race off. And most of the people, particularly at the Speed Project, a lot of people go very fast to 150 miles and then they're done. Because it causes so much physical damage to their bodies in that 150 miles that they get tendonitis or they get a muscle tear or they get a stress fracture. So you end up it's just a very measured movement. It is movement. And you run when you can, you hike if it's steep, you walk a load. I mean, you walk and you eat, but you also build the skills to be able to walk at pretty close to 5 miles an hour. And it's a 12-minute mile running, but you can walk it. It is fast walking. And so, again, what's running? And again, is there a threat? Is 10-minute miles and again, it's careful to not to upset people who have done the London Marathon in 6-7 hours this weekend or 8 hours, and there's nothing wrong with that at all. But the measurement of running versus walking, but it's more about a calculation in your head, a mindset of that you want to get the thing done as quickly as possible. So if you could run, you would, but that's not often the most sensible approach. Is to start running a PB for 5K. In the first 5 kilometers.
5K PB, 495 kilometers of death.
Yeah, and then you're thinking, it's quite a long way to go. I've only got to do that. I've only got to do another 99 park runs, and I'm there.
God.
Well, what's third on the list then?
The one I have done, Hong Kong 4 trails.
Oh yeah, okay.
Which I will qualify to say I started, and sadly I didn't finish. This one is a brilliant race, off the grid, unsanctioned. Kind of, I think one of the brilliant parts of running is when somebody has a great idea to do this race, and it started with the guy doing it over Andre. He's a German guy, lives in Hong Kong. Did the race. Did the 4 trails of Hong Kong in the reverse direction to the way that most people do them, and did them in 4 days. And then over time, he made a race to do them in one go. And what's so brilliant about this race is that not only do you have to do the trail, you then have to get to the next one, and that's included in your time. And so you have to use public transport. You can use, if you have people there to meet you, you can use a taxi or a private car, and the last trail going on to Lantau is on a boat. So if you miss the ferry time, and the 60 hours is the finisher's time to do the 300 kilometers of trails. So if you miss that ferry and it happens, you haven't got enough time to run the final trail, and you don't do it because you missed the connection. So it's got these extra making it more difficult, which is kind of why it's on my list of hard races, because it's 300 kilometers, which is a long way, of course. It's got a lot of elevation. It's got a lot of steps, and it's in February, held over Chinese New Year. The humidity is insane. When I ran, my running singlet was stuck to me in the first 5 kilometers, and I dropped out at like 130 kilometers, and I'd never cooled off. I'd never dried up. I was just stuck, and I was just sweating. And that if you're running humidity where you just never get cool, the moisture never comes off your skin. It's just you just feel slimy the whole
And
time.
you must be I mean, that must be when dehydration and stuff really become a massive issue, because it's just pouring out of you, right?
Yeah, and one of the things that makes it a little bit easier is there's a lot of like places along the way where you can get water. There's a lot of vending machines, and you buy an octopus card in Hong Kong, and you put loads of money on it, and you just tap these vending machines. But one of the mistakes I made actually was that I felt so hot all the time that I was drinking like Lipton iced tea, which is everywhere, and it's like sweet. But then you drink too much of it, and then you create this. You don't think of it like you would do in a marathon, where you're like, well, I can only take in one bottle, 2 gels an hour, say. But because you get hot, you're just drinking these drinks with a ton of calories in, and then I just gave myself GI distress, and I was over the hot, and I was like pulled the plug, which frustrated me because it's a really cool race and the trails are amazing, and you get to run around the whole of Hong Kong and all the islands, but it's super super hard. And
I think that this is a good one, like in terms of time constraint and like cut-offs and things like that. That making those sorts of things making races hard, because obviously you're thinking that ferry is so far ahead of you when you start that you kind of you worry about it the whole time. Like
I think it's like 230 kilometers or something like that is the ferry. So you've got to get all the way there. And obviously, the wheels will and do fall off several times for most competitors. And then, if you don't make it, this one's got everything. It's got, the terrain. It's got tons, and I think it's got something like 15,000 meters of climbing. It's got humidity. It's got a horrible cut-off time. It's got the transport between the trails. It's got everything.
I think it sounds amazing. And again, I don't think enough people know about it. Yeah, I think it's like a real classic that's like very much under the radar. Yeah.
And like it's even got like and I love the sort of spirit of the Barclay marathons and things, but where you don't get anything at the end, and that kind of appeals to me. But this has got you kiss this greeny blue phone box, not phone box, post box, like a colonial post box that's at the end, and it's like this beautiful like bluey green color, and it's got this sort of a little bit like Spartathlon or something like where you kiss the foot of Leonidas. It's got this thing at the end as well, so it's got all of the ingredients for like a truly epic hard race that kind of ticks all the boxes. I think the one thing about it is 60 hours was the thing, and they had a film breaking 60, but somebody's gone under 50 hours.
You're always going to get someone, aren't you? You're always going to get someone.
It's always that guy.
Right, James, hit us with number 4.
Well, we touched on it, and I think it's good, right, to have it in there. The Spine, which is legendary race.
Winter Spine, clarify.
The Winter Spine, yeah. I mean, obviously the Pennine Way is a beautiful bit of trail, but I think the Spine, and it's a race I never want to do. Every time I see a film, I'm like, no. It's one of those where you either there's a few now, and they've always got Damien Hall in it because he's a legend. Yeah. But they're always like, why the hell would you put yourself through that thing?
I can tell Rick wants to do it just from his face.
No, I don't actually. But I think it's this is probably where conditions. I think if you were looking at the list, this is we say conditions are almost the thing that makes that the most hard. Where you're like almost Arctic conditions. Often there's going to be loads of wind. There's going to be snow. It's a long way, isn't it? 268 miles, I think. And yeah, all those things are against you. And I think also it's single stage, isn't it? So you don't have to stop. Obviously you do, but there's no kind of cut off.
Absolutely. And I think that's one of the criteria for me that changes the race's difficulty. So going back to MDS, Marathon des Sables, which is always billed as in the hyperbole as the hardest race in the world. If you didn't have a tent at the end of the day and the clock stopping, I agree. It would be, it would be up there in the hardest race. But that there's an element of if the clock doesn't stop, you can stop yourself, obviously, but then the time continues, and that pressure to not sleep, not rest, because the clock continues to carry on, makes things much much harder. But the idea of doing a marathon, even if you have to carry a bit of your own food, and then laying down in a tent and looking after yourself, is a dream compared to when I've done. For instance, the Speed Project this year, where I slept in derelict buildings and wild in a bivvy, the clock didn't stop. So the whole time I'm sleeping, I'm thinking, I don't really want to sleep too much because the clock's not, clock's still running. And to some extent, I realised, middle of that it didn't really matter whether I was going to be 3 or 4 hours quicker, or it's not that sort of race with, and it's not on my list because there isn't really a time limit to getting it done. But I think once you do that, once you make these things non-stop, like going back to the spine, makes it hard because the impetus on you is not to slow or not to stop, to keep moving at all costs. And that race, I think that original film that Damien did, where they've got like a lump of ice the size of a football on each foot, where the laces have got snow in them, and then the snow's touched to more snow, and it's got cold, and there's water going up waterfalls. I just looked at that and I was like, no, that. I've got way too small amount of body fat and a lack of tolerance for that level of cold that I'll get like 6 hours in and be like, I'm done.
Do you think, James, for that reason that a single stage is why you might choose it as a harder than something like the Dragon's Back, which in terms of terrain is probably more challenging and navigation probably more challenging as well?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, the minute you can sleep somewhere when the clock's stopped and the pressure's off you, that's a huge difference. And just that simplicity of being able to, because most of these single stage ones, there's not, even if there's a life station, there's usually something in the races, but they're not. They're pretty basic. When I did Gobi 400 in China, there were a tent and you had hot and cold water, and there was cover over your head, but they weren't luxurious, and the clock continued to tick. So maybe if you make them luxurious and the clock's ticking, people stay too long. But I think that's one of the criteria: is does the clock continue to? Is there a finality? Is there a cut-off time? Is there a time when if you pass that you don't finish officially? And does the clock continue to tick when you're sleeping?
Yeah, I think that's good. That makes a lot of sense, I think. Right, so what's the final one then?
Well, I'm not going to go into it because everyone knows the Barkley Marathons, but I think the Barkley Marathons should be on there because it's the race that, what's they call, the race that eats its young. That race is it's 3 people finished this year, but for many years people don't finish. So that's got to be the hardest race in the world. Again, there is a cut-off time. There isn't the clock doesn't stop in between laps, and from what I gather, from people I've spoken to who've done it, it's just no route, scrambling through brambles and up steep slopes, and like I love running, but that's just hell. And for that reason,
mentally taxing as well, isn't it?
Mentally taxing. You can easily get turned around. Everything looks the same. It's featureless, and you have to get a book, and it's just weird. It's just and that's weird. It. And when you get to the end, you're called a finisher. Thanks very much. Go home. But I mean, that's the brilliance of it. But it's been done to death, so it's on my list, but tangentially. So my final one, which is a bit of a cheat, but I think it's worth a mention, is the Red Bull X Alp.
Oh,
do you know this?
Is that thing? The vertical climb? That's not the one where you just have to run up the ski slope thing, is it?
No, I mean those are pretty hard, right? But I feel like that everyone does them.
True.
Because you can. If it takes you an hour and a half, you still get there.
It's true.
Red Bull, it's a little bit of a cheat because
they
fly and they run and they. I know that's why I want to bring it in, because I need to go what on every year, and it's hike, run, fly, and they cover something like 2.5. I think it's 1,000 kilometers distance, point to point as a crow flies, but across the Alps.
How you fly?
Like a wingsuit.
on one of those new. It's got very popular in Europe now. Is the small sending parachutes that you can put up and fly off top of mountains. It's really popular with the North Face athletes, some of the runners and mountain athletes who are there, because they can often, and it's more popular maybe in skiing, where you can, instead of having a very treacherous route to some peak somewhere for this crazy downhill couloir, they now fly in, and it takes them hours rather than days, and it's potentially safer. But they do a race, Red Bull, of course, and it's totally nuts. And some of them will run 30 or 40 kilometers with a backpack with the wing in it, and then they'll fly maybe 100 kilometers, and they do that for 2.5, 3 weeks.
I need to Google the suit, because I'm picturing one of those little.
It's not a wingsuit. It's not
suits.
like
no, it's not a wingsuit, but it is a small wing.
Like a hang glider.
Yeah, like a hang glider, a bigger version of what they use for kite surfing. That sort of kite.
Yeah.
But they're very lightweight. They weigh like 2 or 3 kilos now. They're pretty small, and they pack them in a backpack. But then some years the weather's bad, and so they run a lot more than they fly. And when the good years, when the weather's better, they fly more than they run. But it takes 2.5 to 3 weeks. They're not allowed to fly at night, so obviously, which would make a lot of sense. But it's still totally insane, totally off the grid, craziness. And I know it's cheating because they fly, but it's worth a mention.
No, that's right. I like that. I think that's good. That's good.
Yeah, it's totally mad and totally brilliant in my mind that there's people doing these crazy things, and it's actually made me want to learn to fly one of those little kite things because it looks pretty cool.
I mean, the idea of running like one of those like proper little ridge edge like trails and getting right to the summit of something and being like surrounded and then just knowing you've got the means to just fly off the top. That sounds exciting.
Yeah. And then that's why it's getting popular in Europe in particular, because people are pushing the boundaries of running and hiking, and skiing in the winter can actually use these things to access things and get down. And maybe it's actually the flying itself is not that safe, but it's potentially safer than the problems with glaciers and the problems with long hikes in and things. But as a race concept, absolutely insane.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Love it.
Look, the alternative list, the overhyped list. So we've got Marathon des Sables is on there. I think anything by Tough Mudder, and it's the same rhetoric. Like, are you tough enough? Are you too tough for a marathon?
James is logging off.
And throw some
I wish it was as a video podcast rather than because people would see me putting my hands over my face, going. I mean, do you know what? Thinking about these things though, it's all well and good. We've picked these races, they're ridiculously hard, and people are probably listening going, well, what's the point? I'm never going to do these things. But I do think that things like Tough Mudder and things like Marathon des Sables, if you can afford it, and that's one of the big issues I have with it, it's just like £5,000 or something, is that they are these are the extreme levels of doing something crazy. That doesn't mean that people shouldn't think, I could that might inspire me to do something a bit harder. So if people have done a London Marathon or a marathon in the last few weeks or the next few weeks, maybe these things that are super crazy might inspire them to do 50 kilometers or something. It's all relative to where you start, and if you've done a lot of marathons and lots of ultras, then potentially I guess you're always looking for something that scratches an itch. And I look at some of these things, I think, oh yeah, how could I? But also I think, how could I get to the point where I'm ready to do that? And so to take something, or people take something away rather than just these are crazy races, is the adventure is only as simple as going left when you out of your front door when you always go right. And if some of these things, people look at these things and go, oh, that's cool, but it's crazy. Well, find something that's a little bit crazy for you and give it a go. And it doesn't need to be 500 kilometers. It could be 50 if you've done a marathon. It could be a trail race if you've only done road. It could be, whatever. Going in that little park, that bit of woods at the end of the road that you always walk past or run past and never go in. Adventure begins everywhere, but sometimes looking at the most crazy things is a good way to be. Because if people can do this, and I know I've done the Speed Project a couple of times, and that's 300 miles, and I've done the one in the Gobi Desert, and that's not far from 300 miles. But I'm just a regular runner. I mean, okay, I've been doing it a long time, but in London, so I'm not living somewhere crazy appropriate, but I just spent the time over the years doing the sports that give me maybe the mindset and I'm not the poster boy for this at all. There's people out there. Damien Hall is a good example. We've mentioned him a couple of times. Of a guy who has a family and works and does those things and does crazy. We've got the Spine on our list. Super hard races and goes out there and wins it. So, and did Barkley marathons this year and managed four loops. So, yeah, I think that's the thing. It's not to be put off by these things. We're not sniffing at shorter distances, but and the long ones might seem ridiculously out of touch, but actually they're just maybe, that people don't look at. People look at Everest without really any desire to climb it, but it's still pretty inspiring, right? And it might make you want to go up Scarfield Pike or do the 3 peaks in the UK and obviously not go in the death zone, which sounds pretty terrible. But so that's really I think about these things. It's great to talk about the crazies, but then you've got to put them in context. Otherwise, what's the point?
Yeah. Do you think that there's on a final point? Do you think there's any what's the stopping point? Obviously now people are climbing up stuff and flying off the top of them. Do you think that, and people are doing 1,000 miles in Alaska and these sorts of things? Like, what's the tipping point? When do you think it will? Is it just going to be the boundary of what people are capable of, and that's it, or is it just think that that's not even a thing?
I guess so. More and more people are doing it. So again, it's all about these things pushing the limits of physical, human ability. And it's not sort of on my list, but not. But all of those there is particularly popular in the US, the long distance trails. Rick and I exchanged messages before this about saying we wouldn't count FKTs really, because but they are hard. But because it's got to be ridiculous FKTs, because it can. There are the Bob Graham rounds and the Paddy Buckleys and the ones that I was thinking of particularly, like the Appalachian Trail in the US, which is like over 2,000 miles, and the PCT is again the same sorts of distances, and those things are now more and more popular, and more people and doing them at 50 miles a day. And I think there's somebody currently trying to break the record for the race running across America currently, and those things are super hard, but many days. I don't know. I mean, we've seen it in cycling a lot, haven't we? People running around the world riding their bikes around the world in X days, and then less days and less days. And I guess maybe we're seeing that sort of thing in running in the same way. And back to your slight point about is it running or is it walking? No one ever criticises a cyclist when they ride around the world. They're always riding, right?
Are you always pedaling?
Yeah.
I mean, So it's a bit like, I know Ben, you're a big cycling fan, but so it feels a bit wrong to criticise races if you do a lot of walking.
Yeah, no, for sure.
It's just, can you get the thing right? Can you get to the end of that time, that thing in the time, or can you set a new record walking? If you can, then do it. It's like I think it's just about movement as much as it is about the categories of. Let's not get into are you a runner if you walk? We'll be in big trouble.
It's been cancelled.
Quite clearly, you are. I mean, I'm gonna. Of course, it is. Yeah.
James, if people want to find out more about your adventures, long and short, where can they go?
They could. There's not much about my current run from LA to Vegas because I haven't got round to doing it, but. They can certainly see. There's a film on my run from LA to Vegas as part of the Speed Project, currently hosted on the North Face's website, which is super nice. Or put it in YouTube. It's called Solis, SOLIS. Or if they follow me on Instagram @JamesD Poole, there's a link to that on my profile. But it's called 12. If you've got 12 minutes of your life that you don't mind losing, watching.
It's a brilliant film. It's a genuinely brilliant film. It's great.
Watching me just go.
You look
it's hot a lot.
So battered at the end. It just you can really if there was ever sort of like a defining moment of how incredibly hard some of these things are when you're sitting under that sign and you've got tourists just milling around and you're just there oh my god.
Well, this year there wasn't any tourists because I got in the middle of 2 o'clock in the morning, and obviously I hadn't slept. I slept wild, so I probably looked worse this year. And it snowed, and last year was hot, and in the film I just go, oh my god, it's hot. It's like a laser. The sun's like a laser. I think I said that numerous times. This year it snowed, it rained. I wore down jacket and trousers for a large proportion of the trip, and I fortunately bought an REI poncho in the 12 hours before I started running. And I said to anyone, no one take a photo of me in this because I never want to see anyone knowing me looking so unstylish as I look right now in a browny black top with a hole cut in the top. So yeah, you won't see any of those photos, but yeah, wild this year, much more wild than last year.
James, thanks so much for your time coming on the podcast. Always great to chat to you. Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Take care.
So that brings us to the end of this week's Runners World podcast. Thanks very much to our guest, James Poole, and to you, of course, for listening. Let us know what you think about the list we came up with. I'm sure there's some that we've left out. Let us know. podcast@runnersworld.co.uk.
You can subscribe to 3 issues of Runner's World for just £5. Head to runnersworld.com/UK/podcast offer to find that offer. That's the best one for you. And just have a nice little mosey around the website while you're there. There's some great stuff on it. Lots of training stuff, training plans, training features, shoe reviews. Need new shoes? Of course you do. We've got them all. Have a look.
And listen to the podcast on Acast, iTunes, all your favourite podcast apps. Just search Runner's World UK and please do subscribe. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you again next week.